Bang! That's the sound. Every morning, 5:47 a.m., sharp, like a gunshot in a quiet neighborhood. I didn't need to look out the window anymore. I already knew what I'd see. My trash can, upside down in the street, wheels still spinning, and a woman in a linen blazer walking away. Slow, calm, coffee mug in hand. Like she didn't just do something. 19 mornings in a row. I went to the HOA. They sided with her. I filed a complaint. They dismissed it. I moved the trash can. She knocked it over anyway. Every single time, she walked away smiling. Most men would have kept complaining, kept filing, kept losing. I'm not most men. I'm a pipe fitter. I solve problems with my hands. So I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't move. I built something, and I waited. On the 20th morning, she stopped smiling. What would you do after 19 mornings of this, and the HOA does nothing? Drop your city in the comments, and tell me if your HOA is just as dirty. Let me back up and tell you how a 54-year-old pipe fitter from Hendricks County, Indiana, ended up in a Cold War with the most powerful woman in a 200-home subdivision called Whispering Pines Estates. My name's Walt Decker. I am not a dramatic man. I spent 26 years crawling under houses in the dark, threading copper through walls that haven't seen daylight since the Carter administration. My knees hurt. My back has opinions. I drive a 2009 Ford F250 with a cracked dashboard and a pine tree air freshener that stopped smelling like pine trees around 2017. I like my yard, I like my dog, a three-legged lab mix named Bucket, and I like being left alone. I bought my house on Sycamore Hollow Drive in 2019, after my divorce. It's a modest split level on a corner lot. Good bones. The kind of place a man can sand a deck on a Saturday and feel like he's done something with his life. The neighborhood was quiet. The neighbors waved. The HOA sent me a pamphlet about community standards, and I put it in the recycling bin, which, as it turns out, was prophetic. That's when I met Darlene Fitch. Darlene was, and I want to be precise here, the HOA board president, the self-appointed architectural review chair, the unofficial head of the neighborhood watch, and, by her own telling at the July 4th potluck, basically the reason property values around here haven't collapsed. She was 61, wore linen blazers to check her mail, and had the particular energy of someone who peaked in a middle school classroom and never recovered. Her house sat directly across the intersection from mine, a beige colonial with a suspiciously green lawn, and a hand-painted sign near the mailbox that read, "Standards Matter." Our first interaction was cordial. She knocked on my door 2 weeks after I moved in to hand me a printed list of aesthetic guidelines, font size 9, single-spaced, 4 pages, and told me my F250 was visually disruptive to the streetscape. I smiled. I said thank you. I filed it next to the first pamphlet. The trash can situation started in the spring of my second year. Nothing dramatic at first, just Darlene walking past on her morning constitutional, and accidentally on purpose clipping my 96-gallon toter with her hip as she went by. It skidded 6 inches. She didn't look back. Week 2, it was a full sideways shove. The can went off the curb and into the road. I happened to be watching from the kitchen window, mug of black coffee in hand, smelling the wet grass and cold asphalt scent of early Indiana spring. And I thought, did that woman just... Week 4, she brought a friend. Another woman from the HOA board, Patrice Colburn, who wore a matching windbreaker and nodded approvingly as Darlene gave my trash can a full-footed kick that sent it rolling 12 feet down the gutter. They laughed. I watched from the window. Bucket watched from my legs. He growled low, the kind of growl that said, "I see what's happening here." The ostensible reason, the one Darlene later put in an official HOA letter, was that my trash can was improperly positioned on collection days, violating Section 4, Paragraph 3 of the HOA covenants, which required receptacles to be placed flush to the property line, not extending beyond the curb face. My can was, by her measurement, 4 inches over the line. 4 inches. But here's what I knew, standing in my kitchen at 5:47 in the morning. This wasn't about 4 inches. This was about the dent in my driveway where I park a truck she doesn't like. This was about the wind chimes on my porch that she'd complained about twice. This was about a man she'd decided didn't belong in her vision of Whispering Pines Estates. This was about petty power. And petty power, friends, has a very specific weakness. It needs you to do nothing. I did the reasonable thing first. Of course I did. I'm a reasonable man. I moved the trash can, measured it, got down on one knee, which, as I mentioned, does not thank me for this, and placed that 96-gallon toter with a tape measure against the curb edge like I was setting tile in a bathroom. Exactly flush. 0 inches of overhang. I even leveled it. I went back inside feeling like I'd handled the situation with the grace and dignity of a man who did not want drama. The next morning, bang. Same time, same sound. I looked out the window and Darlene was already halfway down the block. Linen blazer, coffee mug, not even breaking stride. She'd just knocked it over like it was a traffic cone in a parking lot. Okay, I thought. Maybe she genuinely couldn't see it in the dark. Maybe, and I gave this theory more airtime than it deserved, she was actually blind to trash cans before 6 a.m., and this was some kind of medical condition. I bought a reflective strip at the hardware store, orange, stuck it around the can like a little warning beacon. The next morning, she kicked the can and took out the reflective strip with her heel, like she was stomping a cigarette. So I did what any self-respecting man does when dealing with the first stages of being messed with. I documented. I set up a $34 Wise cam pointed at the end of my driveway. Low profile. Black housing against the dark trim of my garage door. The kind of small decision that turns out to be the most important one you'll make. Over the next week, I collected 7 separate clips, 7 mornings, 7 different methods of trash can destruction. There was the hip check, the two-handed shove, the running kick, impressive commitment, the slow, deliberate push while making eye contact with my window, and, my personal favorite, the one where she actually stopped, set her coffee mug on top of my can, moved the can to a slightly different position, then kicked it from there, presumably for a better angle. That last one lasted 47 seconds on camera. It looked like she was setting up a free kick. Armed with my footage, I went to the next HOA meeting. The HOA met on the 3rd Tuesday of every month in the Whispering Pines community room, a beige rectangle off the main entrance, with fluorescent lighting and folding chairs that left grid marks on your thighs. I arrived 7 minutes early with a printed packet, timeline, screenshots, 2 USB drives with raw footage. I sat in the second row. I was the only person under 70 not on the board. Darlene presided. She wore a blazer the color of old mustard. When I raised my hand during open comment period and introduced my evidence, speaking calmly, using the phrase, documented pattern of property interference, she smiled. Not a flinch, not a blink. Mr. Decker, she said, the board has received multiple complaints about your receptacle placement over the past several weeks. Frankly, we've been generous in not issuing formal notices. I have video of you knocking it over, I said. Cameras recording public-facing areas are subject to HOA Covenant Section 11, subsection C, said Patrice from the board table, reading from a binder without looking up. Recordings may not be used in disputes between members without a signed media release from all parties depicted. I stared at her. Is that real? It's in the covenants, she said. Now, I want to be clear. That clause was real. I looked it up that night. It was buried, and I mean buried, in the original 2003 Whispering Pines CC and Rs, which are 74 pages long and written in a font that was clearly chosen to discourage reading. It was probably put in by some homeowner who didn't want their yard party filmed, but Darlene had found it and polished it like a weapon. Takeaway. HOA covenants are legally binding contracts. Any clause in them can be enforced and weaponized unless you challenge it in writing or in court. I drove home that night with the windows down, the smell of cut grass and warm asphalt drifting through the cab of my truck, and I had a realization that settled into me slowly, the way temperature changes in a pipe joint. I wasn't in a neighbor dispute. I was in a contract dispute, and those have different rules, better rules if you know how to read them. Bucket was waiting at the door when I got home. He looked at me the way dogs do when they can tell something shifted. "We're changing the plan, buddy," I told him. He wagged his tail. 1 leg less than most dogs, and twice the judgment. I spent 3 evenings at the Hendricks County Public Library, not Googling, actually sitting at a table with printed documents, a yellow legal pad, and a cup of gas station coffee that smelled like the ghost of a better cup of coffee. I went through the Whispering Pines C, C, and R's, all 74 pages, with a highlighter. Then I cross-referenced them with Indiana's Homeowner Association Act, which is thankfully available as a PDF from the State Attorney General's website. Then I pulled up the county property records for every board member. Here's what I found on day 2. Darlene Fitch had served as HOA board president for 9 consecutive years, without a formal election in the last 4. The C, C, and R's required annual elections. The board hadn't held one since 2020, when they decided over email that the sitting officers would continue in their current roles due to the challenges of the pandemic. That email was forwarded to all members, which means it was documented, which means it was challengeable. Under Indiana Code Section 32-25.5-3-5, an HOA must hold elections in accordance with its own governing documents. If it fails to do so, any resident may petition for a special election. Takeaway: if your HOA hasn't held required elections, your state law likely gives you the right to force one, and you don't need a lawyer to start the process. I wrote that down in capital letters on my legal pad, underlined it twice, and did something I hadn't done since I was in my late 20s. I smiled at a piece of paper. But here's where it got interesting. While I was in the property records, I noticed something. Darlene's house, 14 Sycamore Hollow Drive, the beige colonial, the sign, had a recorded easement on its east side, an ingress-egress easement established in 1987, running 6 feet along her property line, which meant a strip of what Darlene had been treating as her private side yard for years was, legally, accessible by the adjacent property owner, one Marcus Greer, her direct neighbor, and by extension, documented in the county records as a non-exclusive passage. Marcus Greer, it turned out, had been trying to get a fence permit approved by the HOA for 2 years. Darlene had blocked it every time on aesthetic grounds. I called Marcus on a Thursday evening. He answered on the second ring. "I know who you are," he said before I finished introducing myself. "You're the trash can guy." "That's me," he laughed, a short, dry bark. "What do you want?" "I want to talk about the easement on Darlene's property," I said, "and your fence." There was a pause. Then, "I'm listening." Now, while I was building my legal case quietly, Darlene escalated. Because that's what petty power does when it senses resistance. It can't stop itself. She filed an official HOA notice of violation against me for improper storage of non-decorative signage, specifically the Wise Cam. She cited Section 11, subsection C, again. She required me to remove it within 10 days or face daily fines of $50. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, printed on HOA letterhead with her signature in blue ink. She'd also BCC'd the full board. Here's the thing about $50 daily fines in an Indiana HOA. They are enforceable in small claims court, but only if the HOA can demonstrate that the violation notice was properly served and the member had opportunity to cure. The violation notice has to cite the specific covenant clause and the specific action required. Hers did. So I removed the Wise Cam. Publicly. Visibly. I walked out at noon on a Saturday, unscrewed it from the garage trim, and put it in my truck. I even gave a little wave toward her window. Then I went to Home Depot and bought a different camera, a Lorex wired system, flush-mounted, completely concealed inside the garage door soffit, with an exterior-facing lens the diameter of a shirt button. Cost me $180, not visible from the street, not subject to the decorative signage clause because it wasn't a device, it was a fixture, flush integrated into existing structure. That camera stayed on 24/7 for the next 6 weeks and captured everything. Darlene knocked over the can 11 more times. She also, on one memorable Wednesday, stopped to inspect the garage trim where the old camera had been, squinting at it, running her fingers along the fascia, while completely unaware that a newer, better camera was watching her from 6 inches away. The crunch of her slippers on the gravel of my driveway was, I have to tell you, one of the most satisfying sounds I'd heard in years. Word got out that I was asking questions. Small towns don't have secrets, they just have delays. By mid-June, 3 other homeowners had called me. First was Loretta Hayes, a retired school teacher on Birchwood Court, who had been trying to get a wheelchair ramp approved for her mother's visit for 8 months. The HOA, specifically Darlene, as architectural review chair, kept returning her application with new deficiency notices. Different reason every time. First, the ramp was the wrong color. Then the pitch exceeded guidelines. Then, and this is real, this happened. The board required a neighbor's signature of approval within 15 feet of the proposed structure, meaning Darlene herself had to sign it. She refused. Aesthetic concerns. Then came Roger Tharp, a 67-year-old retired electrician 2 streets over, who'd been fined $200 for a flagpole that was 1 inch taller than the covenant maximum, despite the fact that Darlene's own landscaping lights were installed in violation of the HOA's illumination guidelines, a fact Roger had documented in photographs. And then, this was the one that really made me sit up straight. There was Floyd Okafor, a 48-year-old truck driver who'd moved into the neighborhood in 2021. Floyd had received 6 HOA notices in his first year. 6. Loretta, who'd lived in Whispering Pines for 11 years, had received a total of 2 in her entire residency. Roger, 12 years, 3 notices. Floyd, new resident, different background from most of the cul-de-sac, 6 notices in 12 months, for things like his basketball hoop being too close to the street and his garden hose being stored in a non-compliant manner. I made a spreadsheet. I am a pipe fitter. I am accustomed to measuring things carefully. I documented every HOA notice issued in Whispering Pines from 2019 to 2023, using the public HOA records that, per Indiana law, any member can request in writing. The HOA is required to respond within 30 days. Darlene stalled, sent me a form letter saying the records were under annual review, but I waited. Because I'd already submitted the request in writing, via certified mail, return receipt requested, and the clock was ticking. Takeaway. HOA records, meeting minutes, violation notices, financial statements, are generally available to all members by law. Request them in writing. Certified mail. Keep your receipt. What the records showed, when they finally arrived 28 days later in a manila envelope clearly assembled in a hurry, pages out of order, 2 years' worth of minutes missing entirely, was a pattern. Violations in Floyd's block were cited at nearly 3 times the rate of comparable blocks. Notices issued to newer residents skewed heavily. The board had also, in 2022, quietly raised the fine schedule without a member vote, another covenant violation. I took all of this to a woman named Eleanor Strickland, who ran a legal aid clinic 2 towns over and specialized in housing law. She spent 45 minutes with me on a Thursday afternoon, reading my spreadsheet and my timeline, and at the end, she looked up over her reading glasses and said, "Mr. Decker, you didn't come here with a neighbor complaint. You came here with a fair housing case." I blinked. Meaning? Meaning the pattern you've documented, selective enforcement correlated with resident demographics, could constitute a violation of the Fair Housing Act. That's federal. Takeaway. Selective HOA enforcement based on race, national origin, or other protected characteristics can violate the Federal Fair Housing Act, even in a private homeowner association. I drove home through a summer thunderstorm, the kind Indiana throws at you in July like it's angry at something. Rain hitting the windshield in sheets, the smell of ozone and wet concrete rising off the road. I had 4 pages of notes. I had a group text going with Loretta, Roger, and Floyd. I had Eleanor's card, and I had a very specific idea about a trash can. See, the whole time I'd been building the legal case, I hadn't forgotten the original insult, the morning ritual, the bang of the can, the roll into the street, the smile from the woman in the linen blazer. I wasn't just interested in legal remedies. I am, at my core, a man who works with his hands. And I had a plan that was both deeply petty and completely legal. I called my brother-in-law Chet, who runs a concrete forming business out of Brownsburg. "Chet," I said, "I need about 40 pounds of ready mix, a 5-gallon bucket, and about an hour of your time." "This about that trash can thing?" he said. "Yeah." "Oh," he said, with real warmth, "I'm in." It was Loretta who found it, actually. She was going through her own copy of the original 2003 Whispering Pines, CC, and Rs. She'd had them in a filing cabinet since she moved in, and she called me on a Sunday afternoon while I was sanding my back steps. "Walt," she said, "have you read Section 14? I hadn't read Section 14. Nobody had read Section 14. It was titled, dissolution, and transfer provisions, and ran 4 dense paragraphs about what happened to HOA assets if the association ever dissolved. Nobody in the history of Whispering Pines had thought it was relevant, but buried in Section 14, Paragraph 2, was this sentence: in the event of board officer removal for cause, as defined in Section 9.4, any fines levied by the removed officer during the 30 days prior to removal shall be null and void, and shall be refunded to the issuing member within 60 days. Section 9.4 defined cause as, among other things, failure to conduct required elections, misappropriation of association funds, or documented unequal application of covenant standards. I called Eleanor Strickland the next morning. If we successfully remove Darlene from the board for cause, I said, every fine she's issued in the last 30 days is automatically voided and refunded? If the covenant is enforceable, yes, Eleanor said, and it's in their own documents, which means they can't argue against it. They wrote it. I leaned back in my kitchen chair, the one that's been wobbly for 2 years because I keep meaning to tighten the bolt, and felt the particular satisfaction of a puzzle piece clicking in from an angle you didn't expect. Here's what we had: documented failure to hold required elections, grounds for removal for cause under Section 9.4. Documented selective enforcement, grounds for a fair housing complaint. Documented violation notice errors and fine schedule changes without member vote, additional covenant violations. And a clause that meant if we got Darlene removed, every fine she'd issued recently, including Floyd's, including mine, came back. There was one more piece. Marcus Greer, my new ally in the fence situation, had quietly hired a property attorney to look at the easement issue on Darlene's east side. The attorney's finding: Darlene had, at some point in the past 5 years, planted a row of arborvitae directly in the easement zone, effectively blocking the recorded ingress-egress passage, which was not just an HOA issue. It was a county code violation. Marcus had filed a complaint with the county zoning office in May, and a notice had been issued, to Darlene's address, requiring removal of the plantings within 90 days. Darlene didn't know we knew about that yet. The full picture, when I laid it out on my kitchen table, legal pads, printouts, the easement map, the violation spreadsheet, Eleanor's notes, looked less like a neighbor dispute and more like a controlled demolition. All the supports were identified. All we had to do was pull them in the right order. But first, the trash can. I want to be clear that the concrete plan was not just pettiness, though it was absolutely also pettiness. It was strategic. It needed to be the thing that made Darlene overreact in public. It needed to produce the moment that would be witnessed, recorded, and impossible to walk back. The legal case needed a detonator. A 96-gallon toter filled with 40 pounds of quick-set concrete was going to be a beautiful detonator. Let me explain the concrete can, because it requires some engineering appreciation. A standard 96-gallon toter, the kind most municipal collection programs use, weighs about 14 pounds empty. It has a lid, 4 wheels, and a molded plastic body that's pretty robust, but absolutely not designed to resist a deliberate kick from a grown adult. Darlene had been proving this daily. The plan: fill the bottom 18 inches with quick-set concrete mix, embedded around a steel rebar cage, then cap it with a thin layer of regular household trash, newspaper, a cereal box, an empty milk jug, so it looked completely normal from above. Place it at the curb on collection morning. Watch what happened. Chet came over on a Saturday. He showed up in his work truck smelling of sawdust and WD-40, with 2 80-pound bags of Quikrete 5000. Overkill, but Chet has a philosophy about overkill. A short piece of half-inch rebar, and a grin that told me he'd been looking forward to this. We mixed the concrete in the garage, layered the rebar into the bottom of the can, poured the mix around it, and let it set for 48 hours. The finished product weighed, by Chet's bathroom scale estimate, somewhere between 115 and 120 pounds. The wheels still rolled, barely, but only if you put your whole back into it. The trash on top looked completely authentic. The can, from the street, was indistinguishable from every other toter in Whispering Pines. But here's the detail that matters. I did not secure the can to the ground. I did not chain it, bolt it, or otherwise anchor it to fixed property. It was a freestanding trash receptacle, placed at the curb, within the legal placement parameters, weighing 120 pounds. Completely, entirely legal. Takeaway: a prank or deterrent on your own property using your own belongings, with no modification to public infrastructure and no physical trap designed to injure, is generally not legally actionable. Check your local codes, but placement of a heavy object in a legal position is not a crime. Meanwhile, on the coalition front, the group had grown. Loretta drafted a petition for a special election, citing Indiana Code Section 32-25.5-3-5 and the HOA's 4-year failure to hold required officer elections. We needed signatures from 10% of Whispering Pines households to force a special meeting. There were 200 homes. We needed 20 signatures. We had 34 within a week. Loretta worked the neighborhood with the same energy she'd once deployed for the school's annual fundraiser: methodical, warm, unhurried. She didn't frame it as an attack on Darlene. She framed it as a governance question. Do you think we should have proper elections? Almost everyone said yes. She collected signatures with a clipboard at the community mailbox kiosk, at the pocket park on Elm Cross, outside the entrance on collection mornings. Roger, meanwhile, compiled a formal complaint to the Indiana Civil Rights Commission, documenting the selective enforcement pattern and citing Floyd's case specifically. Floyd reviewed it and signed it. Eleanor reviewed the language and added 3 statutory references. It was, she said, as clean a preliminary complaint as she'd seen. Takeaway: state civil rights commissions investigate housing discrimination complaints for free. You do not need a lawyer to file. Your documentation, dates, names, patterns, is what matters. Marcus had one job: keep quiet about the easement notice until we were ready to use it. He did this with what I can only describe as the practiced patience of a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment for 2 years. I also, during this period, did something that was perhaps the most important preparation of all. I went to the Hendricks County Recorder's Office and pulled the full recorded history of the Whispering Pines Estates development. Original plat, all recorded easements, the original 2003 HOA filing, and the annual renewal certificates. That last part was the surprise. Indiana requires HOAs to file annual certificates of existence with the Secretary of State to maintain legal standing. Whispering Pines had missed its 2022 filing. The HOA had technically lapsed into administrative dissolution for a period of 4 months before quietly refiling in March 2023. During those 4 months, the board had issued 31 violation notices and collected approximately $4,600 in fines from an administratively dissolved entity. Takeaway: an HOA operating while administratively dissolved may have no legal authority to issue fines or enforce covenants during that period. Check your state's Secretary of State database. It's usually a free public search. Everything was in place: the petition, the civil rights complaint, the dissolution research, the concrete can, sitting in my garage under a tarp, patient as geology. All I needed was a Tuesday. Darlene, to her credit, sensed something. Not the specifics. She didn't know about the petition or the civil rights complaint or the dissolved HOA discovery, but she was perceptive in the way that petty power usually is, attuned to shifts in deference. She noticed that I wasn't moving my trash can after she knocked it over anymore. She noticed that Floyd had stopped apologizing at HOA meetings. She noticed that Loretta, who had always sat in the back of the community room and never spoken during open comments, had started sitting in the front row and taking notes. So Darlene did what cornered authority always does. She accelerated. In the span of 2 weeks, she issued 7 new violation notices across 5 properties. 3 of them were for things that had never been cited before in Whispering Pines history. One homeowner got a notice for a solar-powered landscape light that was not architecturally consistent with community aesthetic standards. Another got cited for a garden trellis. A woman on Laurel Ridge Court got a notice for a windsock that she'd hung off her back deck where it was not visible from any public street. She also went after Floyd again. This time it was a storage bin on his side porch, which she measured and found to be 7.5 inches taller than the 36-inch visible storage maximum in the covenants. She sent him a notice with a $75 fine and a 10-day cure period, and she sent a copy to the rest of the board via group email with a note that said, "Continuing pattern of non-compliance." Floyd called me when he got it. He was quiet on the phone, in the way that means a man is working very hard to stay quiet. "I've been here 3 years," he said. "I've gotten 9 notices. My neighbors on both sides have been here longer and gotten 0. "I know," I said. "It's in the complaint. When does this end?" "Soon," I said. "Very soon." What Darlene didn't know was that Roger had made contact with a local television reporter, a young woman named Becca Larson at the NBC affiliate in Indianapolis, who covered consumer affairs and had done a series on HOA abuses the previous fall. Roger had sent her a summary, and she'd responded within 24 hours. She wanted to talk. She wanted the spreadsheet. She wanted, specifically, to understand how one woman could run a 200-home association for 9 years without an election. We asked her to hold the story for 2 weeks. She agreed, reluctantly, in exchange for an exclusive when we were ready. Darlene also tried to co-opt the situation through friendliness, which was perhaps her strangest move. She knocked on my door on a Wednesday evening. Actual knock. No coffee mug, blazer exchanged for a cardigan, and offered what she called a good faith resolution. If I agreed to withdraw any complaints against the HOA and signed a document acknowledging the camera covenant violation, she would waive all of my outstanding fines and consider the matter closed. I offered her a glass of water. She declined. I asked her if she'd be willing to put that offer in writing. She said yes, and she did. Sent it over email the next morning, on HOA letterhead. A written acknowledgement from the HOA board president that there were outstanding fines against my property, that she was personally offering to waive them as a negotiated settlement, and that this offer was contingent on my silence. Takeaway: if someone in authority offers you a good faith resolution that requires your silence, get it in writing. That document may later establish that they knew they had exposure. I forwarded it to Eleanor immediately. "Oh, Walt," Eleanor said when she read it. "She just admitted she's been using the fine process as a personal leverage tool." "I know. This is very helpful. I know." I hung up and looked at Bucket, who was lying in the sunbeam that came through the kitchen window every afternoon around 4, warm and gold on the hardwood floor, smelling faintly of dog and contentment. He opened one eye at me. 2 more days, I told him. He closed his eye. He believed me. The concrete can was loaded in my truck. The petition was notarized and ready to deliver. Eleanor had drafted the emergency motion for the special meeting. The civil rights complaint was filed, timestamp confirmed. Becca Larson had a camera crew on standby. All the supports were in place. Time to pull the first one. The night before collection day, I moved the concrete can to the curb. It took me and Chet together to roll it down the driveway. The wheels barely turned under the weight, and we positioned it in exactly the right spot. Flush to the property line, 0 inches of overhang, tape measure precise. Then we put the thin layer of trash on top. Newspaper, cardboard, the cereal box, and closed the lid. From across the street, in the amber glow of the street lamp, it looked like every other trash can on every other curb in Whispering Pines. Nothing special, just a 96-gallon toter waiting for Tuesday morning. Chet stood back and admired it. "That's about the most normal-looking thing I've ever seen that weighs as much as I do," he said. "That's the whole point," I said. I set my alarm for 5:30, went to bed, could not sleep, lay there in the dark listening to the crickets outside, the low hum of the central air, and Bucket snoring at the foot of the bed, with the deep, peaceful confidence of an animal who has never once in his life overthought anything. Darlene, meanwhile, had one final move left in her. At 9 p.m. the previous night, I found this out later from Marcus, who had a line of sight to her driveway. She drove her car out, circled the block twice, and stopped in front of my house for a full 3 minutes. Just sitting there. I imagined she was looking at the can. I imagined she was deciding. I also found out, the next morning, that she had called 2 board members the night before to tell them she was planning to formally document a repeat violation in the morning, and that they should be available for a follow-up action. She was, in other words, planning to kick the can and then immediately issue a fresh citation based on the kick, claiming the can had rolled into the roadway, creating a public safety hazard. It was a sophisticated escalation in its way. Kick the can, blame the placement, issue the fine, use the fine as grounds to demand removal of the receptacle from my property entirely. She'd done it before to a different homeowner, years earlier, engineered a violation, and then used the engineered violation as justification for further enforcement. It was a power move that had always worked because nobody had ever documented the setup. But see, here's the thing. I had the Lorex camera in the soffit. Marcus had his own camera pointed at the intersection from his porch light housing. Floyd, who lived 2 houses up on the same side of the street, had a dash cam aimed out his front window on a suction mount. He'd started doing this after the 9th violation notice. And Loretta, bless her heart, had woken up at 5 a.m. and was sitting in her car at the end of the block with her phone propped on the dashboard, recording. 4 cameras, for 1 trash can. I was in my kitchen with a mug of coffee. Real coffee, not the gas station approximation, watching the Lorex feed on my phone. 5:42 a.m. The sky was still dark, with just the first gray suggestion of dawn along the tree line to the east. The street was empty and still. The dew was on the grass. I could see it on the lawn edge, where the light caught it. The air, when I'd stepped out at 5:35 to check the placement one more time, had the cold, clean mineral smell of early fall, the kind of September morning that makes Indiana genuinely beautiful for about 6 weeks before winter remembers where it put you. At 5:47, I noted the time. A figure appeared at the edge of my camera frame. Linen blazer, coffee mug, pointy-toed slippers on concrete. She walked up my driveway at her usual pace. No hesitation. She'd done this enough times that it was muscle memory. She positioned herself at the side of the can, shifted her weight, and drove her foot into it with what I can only describe as real commitment. And then, nothing. The can didn't move. It didn't rock. It didn't skid. It sat there with the immovable certainty of a small boulder, and Darlene's foot bounced off it, and she stumbled sideways, coffee mug flying, slipper-clad foot connecting with 120 pounds of reinforced concrete at roughly full kick velocity. She sat down on my driveway. Not a fall exactly, a controlled collapse. The kind of sit-down that happens when your body receives information that your brain hasn't processed yet. She looked at the can. She looked at her foot. She looked at the can again. I was already putting on my jacket. I came out the front door at a calm walking pace. No rush. I had my coffee. I had my phone, the Lorex feed still running. And I had, in my jacket pocket, a manila envelope containing the petition for special election, Eleanor's legal memo, and the civil rights complaint confirmation number. "Morning, Darlene," I said. She was standing by the time I reached her. She'd retrieved her coffee mug, empty now, contents distributed across my driveway in a perfect arc, and she was holding it with both hands the way people hold things when they need something to hold. Her right slipper had a scuff mark on the toe. She was staring at the can. "What is wrong with this trash can?" she said. "Nothing," I said. "It's exactly where it's supposed to be." "It didn't move." No, it did not. She looked at me. Something shifted in her expression, the first crack I'd ever seen in it, and I recognized it. The moment when petty authority realizes it has miscalculated. "What did you do to it?" "I put trash in it," I said, "like you do." Marcus had come out of his house and was standing on his porch with a coffee of his own. Floyd had appeared at the end of the block, hands in his jacket pockets. Loretta's car was pulling slowly into view. The sky was fully light now, that particular flat silver of early September morning, and the neighborhood was waking up. Another neighbor on his way to his car paused to look. "I'd like you to leave my driveway," I said pleasantly. She didn't leave. She drew herself up, that particular HOA board posture, chin forward, authority reasserted through posture because the usual mechanisms weren't working, and said, "This receptacle is a hazard. It's an unsecured weight improperly." "It's a trash can," I said. "It's in the right spot. I have 23 mornings of footage of you knocking it over. I also have," and here I handed her the manila envelope, "a petition for special election signed by 34 households, an emergency motion for board officer removal for cause under Section 9.4 of your own covenants, and a Civil Rights Commission complaint confirmation number." She didn't take the envelope immediately. She stared at it. "You should also know," I said, "that during the 4 months in 2022, when the HOA was administratively dissolved due to a missed Secretary of State filing, This board issued $4,600 in fines, including several to Floyd here. Eleanor Strickland is prepared to file a recovery action for that amount. Marcus spoke from his porch. And I've been informed by the county that the arborvitae blocking my recorded easement have to come out within 60 days. Darlene turned and looked at Marcus, then back at me, then at the envelope. She took it. The HOA special meeting was set for the following Thursday. Darlene retained a private attorney, the first in Whispering Pines HOA history, and there was a tense 2-hour session in the community room that Becca Larson attended with a camera crew that she agreed to position outside the room, recording arrivals and departures only. The proceedings were not public, but the petition was read into the record, and the 4 grounds for removal for cause were presented. Darlene resigned from the board before the vote. Her resignation letter, which was read aloud by the new acting president, a retired accountant named Harold Stroud, who had been serving as secretary for 6 years and had not, to anyone's knowledge, ever abused his power, cited personal reasons and the desire to allow new leadership to move the community forward. She was out by noon. Patrice Colburn, who had been on the board for 11 years and had looked the other way through all of it, resigned the following Monday. Harold called for new elections within 30 days. The civil rights complaint was reviewed by the Indiana Civil Rights Commission, and Whispering Pines entered a voluntary compliance agreement 3 months later, agreeing to an independent audit of enforcement history from 2019 forward and mandatory board training on Fair Housing Act obligations. Becca Larson's piece ran the following Tuesday. It opened with the concrete trash can and got better from there. Within 48 hours, it had been picked up by 3 additional regional outlets. The comments section, and I know you're not supposed to read the comments section, but come on, was almost entirely people sharing their own HOA nightmare stories, one after another, a long, warm river of Me Too. "Play stupid games," said one commenter, directly under a freeze frame of Darlene bouncing off the concrete can. "Win stupid prizes." Yeah, pretty much. The new HOA board held its first properly elected meeting in November, 6 weeks after the special election. Harold Stroud, quiet, methodical, a man who ironed his work shirts and kept meeting minutes that were actually legible, was elected president by 140 votes. Loretta Hayes was elected to the architectural review seat she tried to use to get her mother's wheelchair ramp approved for 8 months. That ramp got approved in the first meeting, retroactively, along with a formal apology entered into the minutes. Floyd's outstanding fines, all 9 violations from 2021 to 2023, were reviewed by the new board. 6 were voided as improperly issued. 3 were found to have technical merit, but the fines were waived as part of the Civil Rights Compliance Agreement. Floyd got a check in the mail for $475. He told me later he framed the envelope. Rogers' flagpole situation was resolved with a covenant amendment, passed by member vote, that brought the allowable flagpole height to 20 feet and explicitly exempted American flags from aesthetic review. The vote was 147-3. My camera, the real one, the Lorex, stayed in the soffit. The new board amended Section 11, subsection C, to clarify that security cameras integrated into existing structures were not subject to decoration restrictions. I made sure of that at the first meeting. Harold nodded and wrote it down. And Darlene? She stayed in the neighborhood. She did not sell her house, which surprised some people, but I think makes a certain sense. She'd been the center of that neighborhood for 9 years. Leaving would have meant admitting more than staying did. She stopped walking on Sycamore Hollow Drive in the mornings. I see her car sometimes, pulling out of her driveway, and she doesn't look over. That's fine. I'm not looking for an apology. Apologies from people who haven't changed anything cost nothing and mean less. Marcus's arborvitae, Darlene's arborvitae technically, the ones in his easement, came out in October. He put in a split-rail fence. It's nice. It suits the yard. The concrete trash can is in my garage. Chet wanted to put a little plaque on it. I told him that was excessive. He put a little plaque on it anyway. It says, "Positioned correctly, 2023. I think that's about right. Here's what I want you to take away from all of this. Not just the petty victory, though the petty victory was genuinely great, but the actual useful stuff. First, your HOA covenants are a contract. Read them, highlight them, because they apply to everyone, including the people enforcing them. Second, your state's HOA statutes are publicly available, and many of them give you real procedural weapons, special election rights, records access, election requirements. Know them. Third, if you see a pattern of selective enforcement, document it. Dates, names, notice numbers, photos. That's a civil rights issue, not just a neighbor dispute. Fourth, an HOA that lapses its state registration is an HOA that may have been acting without authority. Check your Secretary of State's database. It's free, takes 5 minutes. And fifth, purely as engineering advice, Quickset Concrete sets in about 24 to 48 hours, and Quickcrete 5000 achieves 5,000 pounds per square inch compressive strength in 28 days, just in case you were wondering. The final piece of this story. In the spring, the Whispering Pines HOA, under Harold's leadership with Loretta's proposal, voted to allocate a portion of the reclaimed fines from the dissolution period toward a neighborhood scholarship fund. Modest amount, first year, but it's there. Named the Whispering Pines Community Excellence Award. First recipient was a kid on Birchwood Court, going to Purdue in the fall to study civil engineering. Civil engineering, I know. Bucket is doing great, by the way. Still 3 legs. Still more judgment than most people I've met.
So that's how it ended. 19 mornings of bang. 1 morning of silence. Here's what I want you to take away. And it's not about the concrete. Though the concrete was beautiful. Dylan didn't lose because Worth got angry. He was angry on day 1. Anger doesn't win this fight. She lost because Worth got quiet. He read 74 pages of covenants nobody else had touched. He pulled county records. He made a spreadsheet. He waited, and when the moment came, he didn't just have a heavy trash can. He had a petition, a civil rights complaint, and a lawyer who told him, "You didn't come here with a neighbor complaint. You came here with a case." Petty power counts on you reacting. The moment you stop reacting and start documenting, the whole game changes. If you're watching this and living a version of this story, a fence, a flag, a file that show up every month aim the same address. War playbook is real. The record request, the election requirement, the dissolution check, on public, on free. You just have to read the 5 print harder than they think you will. Drop your HOA story in the comments. I read every single one. And subscribe because next time we got a man fined $1,200 for a garden his HOA president has in her own backyard. Same rules, different address, same outcome. War didn't swing first. He waited until he had something bigger than anger. He had a plan.